president of El Salvador takes blame for the drowning deaths of a father and his young daughter at the U.S. border. AOC's border trip, a lot to work out on that one. And who will be in and who will be out in the next Democratic primary debates? We're going to make some predictions.
Team Rising is here to talk about it all. Roger Fisk is a Democratic strategist. He's an Obama administration alum and the former senior aide of communication and policy for Senator John Kerry. Holly Turner, Republican strategist. She spent 1 year working for the Trump White House and the U.S. Small Business Administration. Two of our favorites. Welcome to you both.
Good morning.
Thanks.
Let's begin with El Salvador. The president of El Salvador, who took office literally just a month ago, said in an interview that his own country is to blame for the death of a father and daughter who crossed the border, saying, quote, "People don't flee their homes because they want to. People flee their homes because they feel they have to." Holly seems to be taking responsibility for the failed state of his own country.
Right.
Yeah.
I personally was very moved by what he said about, it's a tragic situation, and for him to accept responsibility was moving to me. And I thought, that's the kind of country that I want us to be supporting. What can the U.S. do to help El Salvador? If they have a leader in place that accepts responsibility and knows what their real problems are and can put a plan in place to fix them, man, I would love to partner. We should be partnering with them to help them.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we're not. We're
it's conditional.
We're moving in the other direction. I agree with
Yeah.
actually, first off, thank you so much for having me, and it's lovely to be here with Holly as always. I agree actually with much of what she just said, and it would be great. First off, let's agree that it's refreshing that any kind of national leader can step forward and accept some blame and responsibility. I find that to be something we should all somewhat welcome. The idea that the current administration in our country is going in the exact opposite direction and taking a very hostile view to these countries and the role that we can play down there, I think is unfortunate. That said, something like that moment and something like Holly's reaction to it could provide a window for a different way of talking about this. And I think we should always be vigilant and looking out for windows where we can change the conversation around this, because to jump ahead to where I think we're going in this conversation, trying to get our arms around something of the complexity of immigration in a presidential cycle year, you might as well try to discover cold fusion or something. But this could be a window. This could be a moment. And the question is does the president have the fortitude and the patience to embrace it and not just have it be a one-way street of his tweets and his unending thoughts?
Well, what I think it should be is that we need to pressure both Mexico and Guatemala to sign a safe third country agreement. If we did those two things, which would prevent, because Guatemala is the entry point to Mexico, and Mexico alone, if they somehow made it past Guatemala, that would make it so that none of these migrants would be eligible for asylum in the United States. It would effectively end the crisis tomorrow without having to go around Congress. And I'm not sure, why is it not appropriate, Holly, to use funding to these countries as leverage in order to force them to do this?
It absolutely is.
Right.
And who's to say that, some of the threats or discussions we had about not providing future funding did not result in this
These
very
are very
honest
conditional.
dialogue.
Yeah,
Yes.
this is
And
very
so,
conditional. What do you think, Roger?
Do you think the administration pressured the El Salvadorian president to make this statement?
See, I don't buy the idea that we should validate the president's use of Twitter as actual governing. I don't think that's healthy in the long run, and I think it gives him way too much latitude to just kind of have this billowy stuff go flying all over the place. It's not governing, it's not policy. And what I think is the pattern that we're seeing from these folks is that he thinks that's governing. He thinks that's policy. And you just kind of bloviate about this stuff and you externalize all this grievance and conspiracy and everything else, and somehow that's doing the job of president. There's very little evidence of actual legislative vehicles that reflect the things that he's talking about. It's mostly just the constant externalization of grievance and whatever kind of conspiracy he read that morning.
I don't think you're wrong, actually. I think the actual problem, though, is that the bureaucracy and much of his own staff is actually united against him, even though many of his voters want him to do what he tweets. And it's one of these weird balances where you have many of his own staff. They literally brag about how they were taking papers off the president's desk. But, to the broader point on this in particular, on this notion with El Salvador. I just don't see why it's so bad to use leverage against countries to get them to do what you want to do. That's the whole point of being a superpower.
It's been used for decades.
I think, like the way you explain, and this is one of the things with this president that I think Roger is alluding to, is he'll tweet something that seems insane and stupid and counterproductive, and then people go behind and like try to come up with what's really going on and the rationale. We don't have any indication that they're using this as leverage to try to get like corruption reforms or something that makes sense in El Salvador. We don't have any indication that that's the case.
Well, the State Department's been crippled from the beginning. It wasn't even staffed. There's hundreds of slots over there. The hostility towards experts and information and diplomacy and things like that is a pervasive theme here. And I think, unfortunately, in many, many foreign policy contexts, you see the president just think his force of personality somehow, be it by tweeting or his chemistry with Kim Jong-un or any number of other situations, somehow his force of personality is just going to get this all done. We're 2.5 years into this without any kind of real progress in foreign policy at all.
You cannot, okay, I have to defend the president here because we have made progress in North Korea. I mean, look back at what was happening right before the election. Missiles were being fired. It was an extremely hostile situation. People
Missiles
were
are still being fired. They've been fired in the last 45 days.
Not in a hostile way.
And our intelligence services said his
Roger,
nuclear program continues,
do not
of
talk
course.
over me. Let me finish. Just because the president doesn't do things the way things have always been done doesn't make it wrong. And to judge him based on the way he does things and the way he's trying to get things done is just not fair. Now, if you don't like it, that's fine. I understand a lot of people have personality conflicts with him. They don't appreciate the way he's approaching things. It makes them uncomfortable. It's not predictable, but he is getting more things done. When was the last time a president of El Salvador said something like this? I mean, this
That's true. They did
this is
nothing under the
history
Obama
being made. The
administration.
president was the first sitting U.S. president to step into North Korea.
And
so progress is being made, and to say otherwise is absolutely dishonest.
Well, I'm not being dishonest. If you go into your third round of talks with a foreign leader and the deliverable from it is that you're each going to appoint a team to talk about the details of the challenges, that's pathetic. The idea that when the president stepped over that line, he hemorrhaged massive amounts of American credibility, not having any real understanding about our history there, and capping off a 100-hour global tour within which he was hostile to our allies. He cozied up with every single thug or dictator in the world. And I'm not being dishonest by saying, if I'm being dishonest, then where is the progress other than the photo ops in North Korea? There's no substance there. They haven't even agreed to disclose what they have, which is the first condition to even sitting down.
The chairman wouldn't even sit down with Obama. So for him to sit down with the president actually is
every other president, because they were stewards of the Western democratic experiment, different than this president, had preconditions before they would even sit down with Kim Jong-un or his father or his father's father. They've promised denuclearization at least 15 times. We had conditions, just as the Bush administration and everyone else, before we would even sit down, which was some level of disclosure. The idea, and the president does this over and over, is just going in and giving away, suspending military exercises with South Korea for nothing.
That's before they had thermonuclear weapons.
For nothing, giving a massive concession for nothing.
Well, we can't litigate this all today, and we still have a lot I want to get into, which is particularly AOC at the border. She went down to the border. She claimed on Twitter that women were being forced to drink out of toilets, that the conditions are abhorrent. I think they tweeted some photos as well. It really has just ignited a discussion about the conditions of these facilities, and I believe we have a soundbite of her talking about her experience right afterwards.
What we saw today was unconscionable. No child should ever be separated from their parent. No child should ever be taken from their family. No woman should ever be locked up in a pen when they have done no harm to another human being. They should be given water. They should be given basic access to human rights.
So, Roger, this is something that I was talking about with Crystal earlier in today's show, which is I fundamentally believe that AOC and many of these Democrats just don't believe in detention whatsoever. What do you think?
I don't think anyone's come out and said that.
Well, that's the implications. I believe, based on these statements and on their constant harping on this, rather than any of the conditions in Guatemala, on the dangerous journey of Mexico, on all of this, that you could put these people in the Ritz-Carlton hotel and they would still be complaining that they are under some sort of detention whatsoever.
When you look at it, in terms of what's actually on the table in terms of policy proposals, and maybe we can agree on some of this, is increasing the number of judges, getting to the point where we can address some of this backload. I don't think there's a legislative proposal out there saying that we should decriminalize people that come across the border.
Every single Democrat on the stage raised their hand to that
I'll say it again. I don't believe there is a legislative proposal out there to decriminalize. I use words very specifically. And to my point from earlier, I'm fine with members of Congress going down there and trying to figure out what's going on. I find I'm a little bit uneasy with presidential candidates going down there. If they're members of Congress and things like that, I think that's fine. To turn that into a show horse and to buy into kind of the photo op approach that the president has to these things, I don't think is productive. But I can understand why she came out of an experience of witnessing that, because I think part of this cruelty is part of especially Stephen Miller's idea of bringing this whole thing to a boil. And if cruelty is one of the things that does it, I think these folks are fine with it.
Well, I think that is very well taken, because Stephen Miller has been very clear about using cruelty, he wouldn't use that word, but as a deterrent, separating children as a deterrent, right? And apparently keeping them from having showers or basic supplies, adequate food, etc., as a deterrent. I mean, look, I personally actually don't think that people should be held and detained the way that they are. It's not necessary. It's not even, doesn't add to the efficacy of getting people to show up for their court dates. It's not needed except as a means of cruelty. But if you are going to detain people, there is no reason why you can't do it humanely.
So I don't know if any of you have ever been into a jail inside of the U.S. I have. I've worked in a prosecutor's office while I was in law school. It's not a pleasant place to be, right? Like, you break the law. It's not a fun experience. There are certain standards that have to be met. There's air conditioning. Most of our jails don't even have air conditioning. They do have running water. I guarantee you they do. AOC was the only one coming out saying that they didn't.
That's not true. Judy Chu, also others confirmed that same
that they didn't
comment.
have that they
were told to drink water out of the toilet.
I didn't see that. But here's my problem, is that there's so much outrage over the way people who are not Americans are being treated after they break the law, and they are breaking the law. If we want to change the law, that's a whole different discussion, but they are breaking the law.
It's a policy discussion.
It is. Yeah. But where's the outrage over the single inner city mom who was in possession of drugs, who had to go to jail and was separated? I mean, AOC is saying no mother should ever be separated from her child. No family should ever be. Why are we not also advocating for our own American citizens who have not had violent offenses that have been in prison and been separated from their children?
AOC has been pretty vocal on criminal justice reform as well.
Well, I think so too, but I also take Holly's point, which is I look at all of this and I say, Democrats only seem to care about these children once they cross the border. They don't care that so many of them are being raped and misused up along the border, that many of these policies are drawing these children through one of the most dangerous treks across the world. This is something that requires solving. And I agree that we need to solve and do the pull factors.
What do you think, Roger?
Well, we've touched on this before. I mean, the dirty little secret about America is we have an economy that depends on illegal immigration.
Yeah.
If you were to just flick a light switch right now, and the 11 million-ish, depending on one's interpretation of the numbers, would just disappear. The construction sites and the agricultural communities and the restaurants and a whole bunch of other things would come to a screeching halt. These people are responding to an economic incentive that is rewarded by American bosses who look at someone that they have to pay $25 an hour to in benefits and look at someone they can pay under the table, and they give. No one takes the job. They give the job to the person that they can pay $7 an hour to. And I know we've touched on this before a couple of weeks ago, so I don't want to relitigate that. Yes. But that is the centrifugal force that is drawing people to this country.
Everybody agree, and I think both sides agree on that. The question is, what do you do at the border? We have limited resources. Thankfully, Pelosi went ahead and passed the House version of the Senate bill. But I mean, what do you do when you have limited resources and you're charged with securing our border? I mean, Customs and Border Patrol is supposed to secure the border. That is their job.
Right.
you can't ask them to break the law and to not do their job. So we need comprehensive immigration reform. It's not going to happen in an election cycle 18 months before the election period, unfortunately, but it has to happen.
We've got some politics we want to get into, but we got to take a quick break and come back to that. Guys, stick with us. We will be right back after this.